So the strategic communication planning cycle can be a really helpful tool to help think through the steps of early strategy formation all the way down to very specific and concrete implementation plans. But it also can seem kind of abstract without an example. So I'm going to walk you through an example that we've used in terms of what we've done at the Network for Nonprofit and Social Impact, which is the research lab that I run here at Northwestern. And so this is an illustration of really what we're trying to do in the lab with relatively limited resources in terms of our overall staff dedicated to making this happen, which is not terribly unlike many of the nonprofits you might become familiar with over time. So one of the things that we had noticed at the lab is that there was a gap. And so this is a toolkit designed to assess the different types of gaps. There can be gaps between vision and culture, there can be gaps between culture and image, and there can be gaps between images and vision. What we're particularly interested in is actually an image-vision gap. And in particular, the gap that we're seeing is a gap between what we hoped would happen for nonprofit organizations, which is the adoption of evidence-based practices based on research, and our actual lived reality would suggest that most nonprofits are not using those evidence-based practices that we have found helpful in research. So that's the identified gap. And really these gaps are the basis for an emerging strategies or issues that you might want to address through communication. So as we began to think about what we would like to see happen as a lab, we developed a vision where we wanted to affect more nonprofit networks to adopt those evidence-based practices. It's a clear, concrete idea about where we wanted to go. But in order to actually make it happen and actionable, we need to get much more specific. And so we identified a goal of having 100 networks adopt one of our three evidence-based practices that we're promoting by December 2025. The reason why a communication goal is more helpful than just a vision is it lets you know whether or not you've achieved your results or are on your way to achieving them. And so this allows us to say yes or no in terms of our overall progress rather than just more or sometime they would adopt them. The next step in this process, after you think about the gaps between your vision of what you want to happen or that vision of what you would like your stakeholders to adopt and what you see actually happening in practice, is to begin to think about who the stakeholders are that you want to impact with this type of communication. Who is it that you need to influence in order to make that happen? And there really are two groups for us that we've spent a lot of time talking with. One of them are network leaders themselves. These are individuals who are running a single network. For example, in Evanston, there's an Evanston Cradle to Career network. And so there's an individual who's running that network. And they would be one of our stakeholders that we would want to target with our communication because they could make the decision to adopt an evidence-based practice for their organization or for their network. But we also know that there are other types of organizations, foundations, technical assistance organizations, who have the potential to affect many networks. And so they're a second stakeholder group. What the strategic communication model says that you ought to do next is to learn more about their needs and their goals. And we certainly have spent a lot of time talking to those leaders to better understand them over time and to try to figure out how we can address some of their gaps. And one of the things that we've heard is that the academic research is, one, behind a paywall, and two, pretty difficult to read. And so that's one of the things that we're working on remedying through our communication. The next step in thinking through these strategies, and this now is getting down to the level of between the strategist and the manager, is to begin to develop a marketing funnel or a strategic communication conversion funnel. Because often what you want people to do is something that is going to require significant investment of time or resources. In our case, it means changing the way that these networks operate. But for other nonprofit organizations, it might be making a donation for the first time or changing the way that you recycle materials because you, instead of just throwing them away. Once you're starting to talk about behavior change or making an investment, it's usually not the first communication that you send out that's going to all of a sudden create this change. Instead, what needs to happen usually is a conversion along a funnel of marketing or communication. And these conversions go from very early on, where you hope that they will encounter your message for the first time, all the way down to the point where they actually make the final conversion, or they do the thing that you would hope they would do. So we've done that certainly at NNSI. We've started to think about what does this conversion funnel look like. And so one of the first things that they might do is to read, a network leader might read a trade piece or a LinkedIn piece that we've written. So again, we're trying to make this more accessible, broader based, but that doesn't mean because they've read a LinkedIn article, all of a sudden they're going to change what their network does. But instead, that might convert them to sign up for the newsletter or download one of our resources from our website. And those leads then create a set of an email drip campaign, pushing them to sign up for a complimentary phone conversation with me. And once they have those phone conversation, it might lead to a contract where they're working with me as a consultant, or it might lead them to partner with us in a research lab to better fit the evidence-based practice and figure out how it would work for their type of network. Each of those pieces along that funnel is a type of an early engagement checkpoint or entry, and each of those generate metrics along the way. Once you've identified that funnel, this is part of that strategy and manager role again, then you are ready to start handing over the implementation pieces to technicians. And that might mean writing those trade pieces. So writing them, submitting it, working with journalism, developing an editorial calendar or other pieces, and then monitoring the analytics, particularly analytics for each of these steps to see where along the funnel are people stopping, and what could you do to further engage those individuals so that they complete their conversion all the way into creating an evidence-based practice. So one of the last things that you saw in the circle was that backwards, that clockwise arrow going from implementation back to this planning. And one of the things that we would certainly do is we monitor our analytics along this conversion cycle, along this marketing funnel. And in doing so, we can refine what we're doing. Perhaps the sign up for the newsletter isn't where people get stuck. They read the LinkedIn article, but they never sign up. Well, what do we need to spend more time doing is refining that sign up process for the newsletter, figuring out, is that the best engagement offering? Would they like to see that newsletter more often, less often? Does it need to be more narrowly cast? And all of those pieces are only things you know is if you're evaluating these metrics and confirming your strategy over time. So a bit of a longer discussion, but hopefully this illustrates for you how that strategic communication, strategic planning cycle works, and gives you an idea about how those circles could actually be put into practice for a nonprofit organization.